Hi, and welcome to Thousand Ant, where we give you Unity tutorials, devlogs, and indie game dev advice. My name is Matt Shell, and in this video, I want to talk about making the decision of trying to develop a commercial game solo on your own or trying to do it with the team, evaluate some of the pluses and minuses, and then weigh in with my own opinion. Let's get started. So, I think that this question of whether to develop a game solo or whether to develop with a team is not one-sided. It's not something that there's an easy answer for, and I think there are reasons that people might want to do both. I would say, just to kind of spoil my opinion, I would say I come down on the side of working with a team. I have worked on a game on my own and failed to ship on my own. So that kind of colors my experience, right? And I'm now in pre-production pulling together a team to make a commercial indie game with a team, right? And point one, sort of in favor of making a game on your own, is that it is low cost. You do not need to pay for other people's labor, and therefore there is the idea that it is lower risk. Now, is it really though? I think the question is, what is your skill level and where are you in relationship to the market? Now, if you are a total beginner game dev and there's a very remote chance that somebody is going to hire you to do game development work, well, then working on your own, A, may be the only choice that you have, and B, maybe your time is not worth very much in the marketplace, and therefore you're a cheap labor option to work on your own game, and maybe that does kind of make sense. As you start to kind of get to the point where you have some more skills, and somebody might pay you some money, especially if you know how to do things like programming, animation, or technical art, right? Now you're getting into a little bit of a different cost calculation because you could take those skills that you have to the marketplace, try to earn some money, and then use that to fund development, particularly if it's possible to hire people who earn less than you might be earning per hour, right? So does it make sense for you to be sitting there doing a task that maybe somebody else could do for cheaper and free up your time to do high value things, right? I mean, this is kind of the basic logic of capitalism, right? Not to say that that's the only way to do things, but I think that considering we're trying to make a commercial game, which kind of implies the assumption that we want it to be profitable, I think that this is something that you need to think about. So there's not a clear answer there, but I think that you really need to evaluate how much your time is worth and not count your time as free. Point two is that, kind of in line with not counting your time as free, there is and I would say this is an area where working solo is, I'm going to come down and say, is pretty squarely a liability, or this is a downside of working solo, which is a lack of structure and a lack of accountability. Not having any team members waiting for you to finish programming the system or modeling the asset so that they can get unblocked and continue with their work means that you can go in circles a lot. And you can do pointless refactors of your code or throw out art assets because maybe they're not perfect, or waste a lot of time because A, there's nobody saying, hey, don't stop messing with that. I need it now so I can do my work, as a kind of a forcing function to have you continue to make progress. Or B, just say, hey, that's actually pretty good. Like, that's good enough. Like, let's use that and keep going. I remember this from my time working in a duo creating music. So often I would be, let's say I'm working on a drum pattern and I'd be working on it. And then the person I'd be working with would say, okay, stop, you're done. That's good. And I'd be like, what do you mean I'm done? This is not good. Like, I just started this. And they'd be like, nope, it's done. It's good. Stop working on it. Let's move on to the baseline or whatever it was we needed to create next, right? And that is such a freeing thing, right? Because you can be like, oh, it's done. Oh, this is good. Really? You think it's good? Like, okay, let's keep going, right? Whereas when you're by yourself, you're kind of wrestling with that self-doubt of like, well, I don't know. Is it done? Is it good? Am I any good? You know? And so having that other person there to just be like, A, I need to get on with my work, and B, this is plenty good enough in my eyes. Let's keep going, right? When you're by yourself, you have to do that for yourself, and it's much, much harder, right? So I would say that's an area where working on your own is a kind of pretty clear liability, and having collaborators can be a great bonus. Now, are there ways you could short circuit that or get around that? Finding friends, finding other devs who are working on their own, or who can look at your work and be like, no, dude, this is good. Like, keep going. Don't worry about the movement. The movement is done. Like, don't spend more time on that. And give you that kind of outside validation and feedback that can make it so much easier to move forward. So I think you can gather that from outside your team, right? But it's a lot easier to have it in the team. On the side of creativity, kind of point 3 is creative freedom versus creative synergy, or creative chemistry is maybe a better way to put it. Creative freedom, in my experience, is a little bit overrated. Having no constraints, being able to just make whatever you want, like here's an infinitely sized blank piece of paper, just draw something, is so much harder than saying, here's a 4x4 inch square, put a face in there, right? You're like, oh, okay, I can draw a face, like, let's go. Whereas you're like, here's an infinite thing, do whatever you want, is kind of mentally paralyzing. So having some limitations, in my opinion, can be very creatively stimulating and helpful, which may be counterintuitive to people who don't have a lot of experience in creative process, right? I find that constraints and limitations sort of take some weight off of me to create all of that structure in my head and make the decisions and say, the first creative decision I'm making is it's a 4x4 square. The second creative decision is that I'm drawing a face, right? When those decisions are made for you, it almost frees up kind of cognitive cycles to be able to focus in on your contribution and the thing that you're going to make that's unique. Now, how does this relate to being solo? Well, being solo, you don't have anybody else putting a box around you. So it kind of goes back to the last point, but nobody is going to kind of say, hey, we said we were making a match 3 game here. Now you're trying to add this whole RPG system. Like, I'm not sure about this. Are you sure that we're sticking on task? Are we still making the game that we signed up to make? And even if you go and say, you know what, actually, I agree, we're changing scope, but I've really thought about it and I explored this idea, and I'm going to convince you that it's a good idea to add this RPG mechanic to my match 3 game. Well, now there's this kind of validation of your idea because you have to convince somebody else to either to change direction or to change scope or to add a feature. And what that does is kind of hardens your thinking, right? It tests the idea and says, is this a good idea? Can I communicate this to somebody? When I say it out loud, is it actually good or does it sound crazy, right? I mean, as a creative, right, you may have this experience like, you're like, oh, in my head, and it's so cool. You like have a dream or something. You're like, wow, yeah. And then it's this and this, and this is feeling about it. It's going to be amazing. And then you try to explain it to somebody and you're like, and then we're just going to make it and it's going to be really good. We're going to make it really good. And they're like, how are we going to make it good? And you're like, well, it's just going to be really good. It's going to be cool. And it's like, so being forced to communicate the idea is a kind of a little kind of narrow eye of the needle that you have to get through to make sure that this idea is real, right? That it kind of pushes it in and hardens it and makes it concrete and tests its viability And that now, if I've been able to convince my collaborator, let's say like, yeah, no, I really think we should do this. We should change it, get rid of the old thing and do it like this. And they're like, okay, you know, I thought about it and it's good. Then you've got something that is just, I would just say, probably much more likely, probabilistically, to be good, right? Whereas when you are in your own head, going in circles and imagining and dreaming, it is really possible to go off in some strange directions that in the heat of the moment seem good, but then, you know, hours, days, weeks, or months later, you realize maybe they weren't good, right? And you kind of lost perspective. You were standing too close to the painting, right? You didn't step back and take in the whole thing and realize that you've made a mistake, right? So having constraint on your creative freedom of being forced to convince somebody else of your idea, as much as for people may resent that and feel limited and creatively stifled by that, and there may be cases where that's true, I would argue that it can also be a very, very healthy process of validating an idea and having it come to life in a more realistic way. The other piece of this that I think is unambiguously better in teams is this kind of idea of creative chemistry. Now, there's a really important kind of assumption here, which is that you have talented, skilled, creative collaborators, right? If you have somebody that's not good or that you're not compatible with, this chemistry is not going to catch fire, right? And it's probably actually going to be much more painful and difficult. And that may actually be a sign that, hey, this is not the right collaboration, right? If you just can't get that chemistry going. But having had that experience of really fluid and reinforcing collaborations on a creative level where you're kind of just passing the ball back really quickly and there's this great dance of ideas going on, I can just say, from my perspective, unambiguously, that I feel better ideas are created. That just mixing together those two streams of ideas, assuming you've got compatible people with skill and talent, that you just get something, first of all, unexpected, right? The first version of the idea is almost never the best version of the idea. And I think that's a kind of a creative rookie mistake. The idea that the idea just, or the kind of misconception that the idea just emerges fully formed, that you're like, I've got an idea, Star Wars, right? And there it is. In fact, it's this iterative, cyclical process of being like, what about this? And then maybe this, and what about that, right? And some of our most beloved and canonical works come about not through the vision of a singular genius, but through a collaboration of tens or 20 or hundreds of people, each putting in and steering and nudging and contributing their creative juice and idea and those kind of personal experiences that come from inside and go into the work and give it kind of texture and emotional realness and heft. I think that, of course, it's possible for that to happen with a lone artist, and it does happen, and we have those examples in history. I just think it's less likely. In conclusion, I think you can see where I'm trending. Me personally, I prefer to create with a team. I think it's richer. I think the output is better. I think it's more fun. It's less lonely and sad, which is a whole nother, that could be another bullet point in this, but maybe not to belabor it, right? But I think that I really come down on the side of creating with a team. I'm doing it now. My new game project, I'm building a team and working with a team on it. And it just feels so good. And I just feel like it's so much better than when I was working on my own. And I just want to kind of share that with you because I feel like people may not, they may not be valuing the different options with all the information possible, right? So not to say that my answer is your answer or my answer is the best answer, but I think it's good to question this and to think about it and to talk about it as we're doing here. So as always, I really am interested to hear from you. Drop me a comment down below. Let me know what you think. What do you prefer? Are you team solo dev or team dev? And Drop a like on the video. It helps other people to find it through the YouTube algorithm. If you're not subscribed already, please do consider subscribing. We appreciate it very much. Sends us a nice signal to keep going and keep making these videos. Yeah, as always, I just really appreciate you spending a little bit of time with me. And thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.